Gathering since about 2006, 2007, ever since I got my start realizing that someone had decided to back, of all things, their Yu-Gi-Oh deck with a bunch of cards from, I believe it was Dragons of Tarkir at the time. That might be a bit anachronistic, but that covers the nascent tendrils of how I started playing Magic the Gathering. And as I started playing it, I came to a realization a lot of people do. Magic is expensive. And one of the things that you realize when you realize that Magic is expensive is that there's a wonderful format for those of you who don't want to get diffed by your wallets every week, who have a low paying, no paying, minimum wage paying job, and that's limited. This beautiful format where you can play sealed, you can then go from sealed and you can do top eights for drafts on it or go to day twos, and this felt like a very freeing, very fun environment that I played for very many years. But over the last couple of years, my desire to play my favorite format has gone away, and I don't think that I have changed my mindset that much. It's more that all of the things that I liked about the format just didn't seem to be there anymore. I went from seeing a couple of inconvenient hiccups to more and more problems that I just disliked, didn't have fun with, and didn't enjoy. But the thing that really kicked this off and made me think about wanting to make a video about this, structure my thoughts, organize them into a video, was actually the Trinket Mage. The Trinket Mage made a wonderful video, I'm looking at it right here, called The One Ring Doesn't Matter. This was posted on December 16th of 2024 this year, only a couple of weeks ago, almost exactly 2 weeks to the date, in fact, and it talks about how actually the ban of the One Ring in Modern is not important. Returning Splinter Twin to Modern is not important. None of these things are important because the mere existence of the Lord of the Rings set, and to a greater extent the Modern Horizons set, has turned Modern into a rotating format, the likes of which it was never promised to be, which has actually severely curtailed its ability to ever be the format that the Trinket Mage loved in the past. I don't want to say everything they have to say in that video. I mean, it's a 10-minute video. You can listen to them in their own words. They're more experienced in terms of their messaging and how they would frame it. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link in the description when this gets ported to YouTube later. The reason I'm bringing all this up is that made me realize that, yeah, actually, maybe this framing of the format isn't what I thought it was anymore. It's not any longer what it used to be, is the thing that is more responsible, more than me distancing myself from the game itself, because I've been trying to actively participate, and I have just found it lacking. So let's get into it. So there's a multitude of reasons we can talk about why Limited is just fucked. It is a train wreck. It has gone off the rails. The conductor has left, is still over at the station. It's careening off the rails. Superman isn't here to put in railing to stop us from failing off over the bridge. It's completely dumpster fired. And we saw this happen over a course of several years. This goes all the way back to, in my mind, Patrick Sullivan's idea in 2017 on Ravenous Chupacabra and the implications that it has on card design and set design. But it also goes into things like play boosters starting in 2024, the impact of Commander, the number of legendary creatures, and so we're going to get into all of that. So we're gonna start over here. I think we're going to start with something a bit smaller, a bit easier to digest, more in the recent past. So we're going to go to 2024, where we're going to talk about play boosters. Now, for those of you who don't know, play boosters was a fundamental change that was put in the distribution of slots inside of Limited. Now, this is very important. So very quickly, for those of you who didn't know, previously in a 15-card pack, right, in a set, you would have one rare, 3 uncommons, and the rest would be commons. Now, this meant that a lot of those commons were draft chaff, but it also meant, since the rare spot would either take up a rare or a mythic, that if you opened and sealed, you had a pretty good chance of getting 6 rares or 6 mythics. But this also meant that a lot of the balance was on the uncommons, for them to either be misleading signpost cards for draft that you may or may not want to have as build-arounds as the years went on, but it also meant that the commons were a bit more powerful because they had to contend with some truly ridiculous rares and mythics. Let's go ahead and take a picture over here. I'm going to show you. We're got first time doing this, so it might be a little janky, a little wonky, but hopefully it gets the idea across. There we go. Okay, sick. Can you see my face? Almost. All right, there we go. And we're just going to go ahead and expand this. You can see that this is play boosters. This is talked about in several articles. The first is by LSV, Luis Scott Vargas, someone you've definitely never heard of before. I'm reading it right here. You can see it. 15 Grand Prix top 8s, 10 Pro Tour top 8s inducted into the Hall of Fame for Magic the Gathering. Definitely someone who knows a little bit about a little bit about a little bit of something, right? And he has his own thoughts on it, but here, let me just hide my face for a second. Yeah, oh, it's my whole face being hidden. And you can see what we're going into right here. So we can see that slots 1 through 6, as opposed to 1 through 12, 1 through 11, as previously, are commons. And now there is a list card. Now, list cards can be possibly a card from outside of the set itself. They tend to, for instance, in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, be a bit of removal, so they can play off the crime mechanic. Then slots 8 through 10 are uncommons, the same 3 we'd had previously. And now notice what we have here is that there is a rare or mythic rare in slot 11. Then there is a non-foil wild card, a foil wild card. Now, all of this looks like there's not too much insane power creep that's going on. I mean, after all, you just saw there in a set of 15, there's 1 art card, there's a couple wild cards, there's maybe something from the list, but there's only 1 rare and 3 uncommons. But the actual net impact of this is that there is a multitude of rares that now constitute each individual pack inside of Limited. And so that means that the balance of the game is more rare heavy, rare and some uncommon heavy, whereas previously when you played, let's say, in Scars of Mirrodin, yeah, your rare and your uncommons, are a bit less likely, and you have to make do more with commons. I mean, my favorite example in modern times of what a good card would look like for a common would be something like Spore Crawler. But the problem with play boosters is actually gone through by Martin Juza, sorry if I'm ruining anyone's name, and Luis Scott Vargas in two items that they cover here. So let's go ahead. We're going to extend the entire thing. It's going to cover the title, but that's fine. I think it's going to be more appealing. So we're going to see something over here, and it's a bit concerning. It's a line of things to come, posted October 18th, 2023 by Martin Juza. I am so sorry if I've butchered your name. So we're going to go ahead and show that. Will play boosters kill limited Magic the Gathering? Now, I'll summarize the article, but starting 2024 in Murder of Karlov Manor, there will be no more draft boosters or set boosters. There will only be play boosters. In addition to there being a price increase, it is implied that one of the reasons that the change occurs is that not only do set boosters sell more than draft boosters, but also draft boosters just weren't making the money. And the problem with draft boosters not making the money, as we can see here from Mark Rosewater, is if we didn't do anything, draft boosters were going away. This whole change was to save drafting and other limited formats. Now, there's an article, part of the article here says something that I've experienced in my own brain, like in my own gameplay. How do play boosters change the limited play experience? Again, this is like, we're getting this article October of 2023. We have a full year now of 2024 is behind us almost to understand how this is manifested. And they said, I fell in love with limited. Here we go. I fell in love with limited because I really like how it teaches you to get the most out of your cards. I love playing with underpowered cards. In my ideal limited world, there would be no rares or mythics that win the game on their own. I always found limited so much fun because it rewarded quality drafting, reading, and setting signals, good deck building, patience, and precise play. I like when choosing to draw makes the difference because the extra card matters in a battle of weak resources. I like when the game rewards you for creative sideboard plans. Lately, I haven't always been feeling that way. Now, this article goes in to say that there are some exceptions that were felt, and for instance, the power increase of rares was not quite as felt in things like Dominaria or Brothers War, or Dominaria Unite or Brothers War, where maybe uncommons and good play patterns could make up the difference. But this facet of play boosters, this increasing rate of rares and uncommons, has the side effect of making more limited formats feel like Prince formats. This is especially relevant because if you go to a 10K, you go to a Grand Prix, you go to one of these events, instead of opening up and knowing you have 18 uncommons and 6 rares to work with, it really becomes a battle of Prince sets. Do you open up the best rares? But we can't lay the bane of limited, the train wreck of limited, only on the number of rares and uncommons. It could be easily argued that you're just getting rid of the commons that no one was playing with in the first place, or that they were going to include as their 23rd/24th playable and beyond, and that was just stuff that you just didn't want to see and you would instantly light on fire mentally and not include in your deck. So let's go into why this is actually a problem. It has very little, in fact, to do with the increasing rate of rares and uncommons, and it has a little bit more. We're even going to show this, what's being shown over here. Let me see. I'm just going to show a point. In case you think I'm just making this up, we're just going to dive back over in here. Here's Luis Scott Vargas saying, what are the effects of this? Packs can have a lot more rares. You can see the example here being that there are 4 of them. I can confirm that when I played Outlaws of Thunder Junction, one of my limited experiences was that I had not 1 but 2 Selvalas, and I had a deck that had 10 playable rares excluding those 2. Obviously, we win those when those happen, but it does feel like I'm playing with a lot of cards that just auto-win the game for me. And then also, this is another thing we've noticed, is that the list cards that exist from outside of the given set, just generate more value, especially in Outlaws of Thunder Junction because of crimes, but they exist elsewhere as well. As you can see, they can be planeswalkers, they can be other rares or mythics that have an outsized impact, and so the board game-like aspect of Limited is also being impacted, not just by the increased number of rares and possible mythics and the card density of quality that we're seeing now, but it's also being negatively impacted because you lose the board game-like idea that all of the cards can be known with a certain degree of expectation. Listen, I didn't like playing Modern Horizons 1 Limited and losing to Hexdrinker, but there's no question in my mind that I knew that Hexdrinker was part of the game, right? Whereas with list cards, sometimes just bad shit happens, right? Now, that's enough that we're going to go over here for the play boosters. We covered 2 people's coverage on what they think the impact is. And you can see here, more rares leading to more print sets. Also, it feels more like constructed. It feels more like you jam a rare or a mythic and it just wins the game. But we can't put the full fault on that just on the quality, on the number of rares. We also have to put that on the quality of the cards that you're receiving. So we're going to go all the way back, covered in a tire track. That's right, Jackie Chan Jump Top landed on his back. For those of you who are old heads, we have something here, thankfully saved by Reddit and Magic, in our Magic TCG. It is from Star City Games Columbus. Star City Games Columbus Open, January 6th to 7th of 7 years ago. This is day 1 of Modern, and it's happening, I believe, between round 7 and 8. And we get this excellent commentary here from Patrick Sullivan, who gives, they're reviewing, not Amonkhet, yeah, they're reviewing a new set, and they see this uncommon Ravenous Chupacabra. Now, I'm just going to show you on screen what Ravenous Chupacabra actually looks like. Here we go. We're going to do this, and we're going to shrink it a little bit, right? And for those of you who can't quite see that, Ravenous Chupacabra, let's even expand this so maybe you can get a better look at it. There we go. When Ravenous Chupacabra enters the battlefield to destroy target creature an opponent controls. Now, this is a 2 black 2/2 that destroys a creature on entering the battlefield. This effect is quite tame by the framing of 2024 Magic the Gathering, especially in 2024 Limited. But I want you to hear what Patrick Sullivan says in this instance about Ravenous Chupacabra. And you can start to see that all of the design considerations that this card represents have permeated out in the 7.5 years since this announcement, and it has proven to be quite prescient. So I'm going to go ahead and let it be played.
The watch is off. You should read Patrick Chapin's article from a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
He's a colleague of mine out in Denver, and he wrote an article speaking to what he believes are sort of systemic flaws in the way that Standard has been designed and developed over the last couple of years. I think it's a very thoughtful article. It's worth a read. I agree with much of what he presented there.
Where can you read that?
StarCityGames.com, premium side.
There we go.
Very good articles, by the way.
Yeah.
When you develop the format around, when you decide Toolcraft Exemplar is a card you're going to be making, that puts a lot of pressure on your removal. And when there's a lot of pressure on your removal to be very good, it puts the format in the types of threats that get played land in 2 spots. There are things that are really cheap and things that are good against removal, either because you can't kill them or because they generate value coming in or going out.
Okay, so we're actually not going to continue this, although this is an amazing thing to read, to see. If you have not seen this before, I would highly encourage you, give it some time and some attention.
Battlefield.
But there we go. We're going to go ahead and pause that. But I want you to keep in mind what was said right here. The problem with having very efficient removal or greater removal is that you encourage the game to be around having very fast threats that occur immediately, aka before removal can get off the ground, right? We saw things like in Throne of Eldraine, you have some premier common removal in Bake into a Pie, 2 black, destroy target creature, you gain a food, right? Can tap it and gain 3, and then also there's others ancillary effects that has. But we have seen both of these things happen in the 7 years since this proclamation was made. Sets have not only been designed and limited to have greater amount of removal, but the cost of removal is higher and is not as efficient. We don't have murder. We have Bake into a Pie, right? We don't have we don't have pacifism. We have like a 4-mana version of Journey to Nowhere that's on a creature body, right? On an underwhelming creature body at that, right? And we'll go into some examples with Duskmourn, which is one of the more recent sets. I can show you how this has changed, but I want you to note that the other answer has also happened. We've seen this permeate out through constructed Magic as well. The other possibility is, hey, if it's not low enough to the ground that the threat is immediate, relevant, powerful, and gets something done, then it has to be immune to removal. It has to be efficient despite removal. It can't be something that loses to pacifism or loses to Doomblade. And you're going to see a couple of examples here as we go into Duskmourn about exactly how this has happened in recent years. This being like a representative sample of what the sets have been like. I'm going to show some math later that shows that this is in fact representative. But more and more, the answer is creatures now get their benefit on the way in or leaving out, as in the Ravenous Chupacabra example over there, but there's a couple of other ways that this is actually going to go. But the reason that this happens and they generate value in or out, we'll talk about a bit later. I'm going to seed this into your mind, is that this is the Timmyification of Magic, right? Johnny, Timmy, Spike. Timmy is one. Timmy is not allowed to feel bad in current Magic the Gathering, and this is a major negative influence on the part of card design inside of Limited. But let's continue with Patrick Sullivan's point. Let's look at Duskmourn. Let's see if there are some examples of cards that are just, they're meant to generate value on the in and on the out, or answers are not meant to be so efficient. So we're actually just going to have a couple looks over here. I want you to keep in mind as we look at all of these examples that basically all of these cards that generate value on the way in or out that have any appreciable mana cost to them are all designed around the idea that they should not feel bad. I'm going to go ahead and look up something right quick. Let me see if I can't find this. We're going to look up 2 cards that I think are emblematic because they're both attracting the same player archetype, and we're going to use this example as we go through Duskmourn. I want you to just keep it in your head. So we're going to look up, here we go. We're going to look up Liege of the Tangle. There we go. Come here. Come here, come on, open up, there we go. We're going to look up Liege of the Tangle from Scars of Mirrodin, and then we're going to look up Avabruck Caretaker and Hollowhenge, or its other side, Hollowhenge Huntmaster, right? And we're going to go ahead and look that up. And the reason this is relevant is that these are both threats that are giant top-end mythics, that are mono green, that are very dominant or capable inside of their sets. And I want you to notice the difference in agency and the difference in blowout potential that's represented by these 2 cards. If you've just heard the names and you know what I'm talking about, then you're already well ahead of the curve. You probably agree with what I'm saying or think that it's at least relevant and interesting. But if you don't think that it's interesting or relevant, or you need the example, I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over here. I'm even going to do this to shrink, we'll just blow it out a little bit. This is from Scars of Mirrodin, Liege of the Tangle. I want you to note many things here. First off, 6 green in limited. Very difficult to get there in Scars of Mirrodin. Also, this set, deeply affected by artifacts and artifact synergies and things being low to the ground because of Infect. So even it being an 8-mana 8/8 with Trample, that's a decent rate already. But again, we're not blowing anything out of the water here in terms of a mythic. Let's read what Liege of the Tangle does. Again, not even bringing in context of the rest of the set and how this is actually very difficult to get on board, and actually there's a lot of ways to chip this thing down. Let's look at the effect. Whenever Liege of the Tangle deals combat damage to a player, you may choose any number of target lands you control and put an awakening counter on each of them. Each of those lands is an 8/8 green elemental creature. For as long as it has an awakening counter on it, they are still lands. Now, I want you to note a couple of things. It says whenever Liege of the Tangle deals combat damage. How does Liege of the Tangle deal combat damage? It's an 8 mana 8/8 with trample, so you have to play it. Once you play it, a full turn passes. Then it gets to swing. It has to swing and still be alive at the end of the swing, because while, dealing combat damage, choose any number of target lands you control and put an awakening counter on each of them. Liege of the Tangle puts the awakening counters on them, but the awakening counter doesn't make a thing an 8/8 green elemental creature token as long as it has an awakening counter on it. That's not something the awakening counter has. Liege of the Tangle has to be on board to give the effect of the awakening counter to make these things into 8/8s. Otherwise, they're just lands with awakening counters on them, but no one's checking what they are or what they do. So Liege of the Tangle has to be, you have to spend the mana to play it. It has to be able to swing and not die. And then if it deals combat damage, you can turn all of your lands into 8/8s, and then the next turn you can threaten to win, provided that your opponent does not find some other way of defeating the Liege of the Tangle in the meantime. So notice here what we've got is turn 1, turn 0, it's played, turn 1, it swings, turn 2, it is threatening to win as an 8 mana mythic in the set, right? Now, I want you to note, Avabruck Caretaker, same colors, same, appeal to Timmy in that player archetype, same I play it immediately happens. Remember, Liege of the Tangle, turn 0, I have to pay an 8 mana card. Then turn 1, I have to swing with it, and it has to live long enough for turn 2 for me to swing all of my lands, right? And even then, there's plenty of counterplay. Now, look at Avabruck Caretaker. Remember how Patrick Sullivan in that short talked about how we don't want to, if you make removal too efficient, you actually generate cards that either generate value immediately or don't care about removal. Welcome Avabruck Caretaker. This is a 4 green 4/4, so stat line a little bit worse. It is hexproof. I want you to note that it's hexproof. I also want you to note this idea that it doesn't generate a feel bad. You won't get blown out on your Avabruck Caretaker, and here's why. Unless it's countered, it is hexproof. At the beginning of combat on your turn, not the beginning of upkeep, God, that might require you to go an extra turn. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 1/1 counters on another target creature you control, so you immediately get a 6/6 worth of power and toughness for 6 mana on a 4/4 that generates additional power, but that's only the daybound side. If we go to, come here you. If we go to the Nightbound side of Hollowhenge Huntmaster, because it has mode change, it has the Daybound Nightbound, then it is a 6/6 hexproof that gives all of your other permanents hexproof. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 1/1 counters on each creature you control. So notice the play pattern for Liege of the Tangle. I play something, I need it to live, I need to swing in combat with it, it needs to deal damage, it needs to not be dead the next turn, and then I get the benefit. Whereas with Hollowhenge Huntmaster, we're following Patrick Sullivan's advice. We don't want to generate things that feel bad when we get killed or blown out, so we're going to have this thing be hexproof. It's going to generate value immediately on the way in, and then also, just by virtue of playing the game and it not getting killed, it's going to generate permanent value. Even if you get rid of it, it actually prevents that value from being rescinded. So I want you to think about all of that, because we're going to go back. Here you get to see my face again. Hi. So the reason I bring all this up is that I want to emphasize this idea that older cards let you get blown out, right? That maybe the removal wasn't as common, but what did exist was more powerful. The disparity in skill between rares and uncommons was not nearly as high as it is presently, and perhaps most damningly, you were allowed to feel bad. Now, the current design philosophy, since about New Phyrexia for Commander and about War of the Spark for everyone else, God bless the rest of us in Constructed, has been to avoid feel bads. We don't want people to feel bad for what occurs to them, and I want you to remember that as we go ahead and look at Duskmourn. Oh yeah, we're going to be looking at a recent set. And all of these things lead to the demise and my interest of Limited, by the way, because you don't get incremental advantage. Your opponent is allowed to play more rares, and I've just demonstrated the rares, and I'm going to demonstrate with this set, more of the rares and mythics that are played are made specifically with the purpose of not letting the person playing them feel bad. So people have access to more cards with fewer counterplay that rewards them more for playing the card and letting it win on its own than them playing around it or taking up any kind of bet or fighting off any danger. So we're going to look into the set over here, and obviously this won't be a one-to-one for all of my points, but I want you to note some of the examples we're going to find here in Duskmourn. All right, so here we go. We're in the Duskmourn set. I want you to note there's a couple of these that feel pretty good, like Abhorrent Oculus. Yeah, it's a 5/5 flyer, but you know, it gives something back to your opponent, and it has a pretty restrictive casting cost, right, of exiling 6 cards from your graveyard. But let's skip that and go to some ones that you would never see in an older set, which I'll prove after this, by the way. Look at all of the Endurings. All of the Endurings have an effect that helps this feeling of not getting blown out. Now, here's what I mean by that, because this is a bit complicated. Give me a second. We're gonna dive back over here so I can make the point to you. Not feeling like you got blown out or that you get something on the way in or out doesn't necessarily mean enters the battlefield or when it dies. It can also mean things like we just saw with Avabruck, where you play it and it has hexproof and on your next combat. I mean, that's not an enters the battlefield ability. It's actually more powerful and more cyclical and more looping than it, but you get value from it immediately. Right? Also, haste is getting value from a creature immediately because we don't have to wait a turn to get something, right? Having an ability that we can spend life to cast and use immediately is getting value right here on the short end. So I want you to note that we're going to be seeing that with things like hexproof and ward to not feel bad we're getting blown out, ETBs and haste to make sure that we can get value right now. So we're going to go ahead and show that in Duskmourn, give you a few more examples of why I just think Limited has kind of betrayed my desires. So we look at all of the Endurings. All of the Endurings are at rate or slightly below rate just for the vanilla side of the creature, and it has a passive effect that has merited them being rares or mythics, depending on how attractive the art is, frankly. And they all give you an effect when some other condition is met, but if they're ever killed, they come back not as the creature side that you don't care about, they come back as the enchantment side that you do in fact care a lot about. Okay, I mean, this is a mythic, but you know, whenever it attacks, manifests dread. Okay, well, that's not too bad, actually. You know what are bad? All of the overlords. Every one of the overlords has a Titan effect, where it says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, do a thing. So that means just for spending 5 mana for a 5/5, you also immediately get this effect. No additional player considerations required. I mean, my favorite one of these is the Overlord of the Mistmoors, where, oh man, we wouldn't want you to get blown out by paying 7 mana for a 6/6 that didn't give you immediate value, so we're just going to give you 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying, which would be enough to win the game by themselves. We'll give you a couple more examples, then we'll go from there. I mean, obviously, we could just stop at the mythics and look at things like Kaito, but we're not going to do that. Here's another great Timmy example, Balustrade Worm. This spell can't be countered. So it's a 5 mana 5/5 with haste, so you're going to get the value anyways. But just in case you could accidentally fuck it up and put it on an empty board in a bad case, don't worry, this spell can't be countered, and trample and haste. Oh, and you can bring it back from the grave. Is this a mythic? Nope, it's just a regular rare. It's just a regular rare. It's totally fine. I mean, we see basically a multitude of cards here that reward you from getting things right now. Now let's look at the counter to this, right? Like, what if this isn't so bad? I mean, you know, we could have stronger removal tools to handle these. 1 second. But if you think that, you haven't been paying attention. Again, the thing that I dislike about Limited that has been pushed forward on and on and on and on is to make sure that there are no feel bads. If you have, we give you more of the rare and powerful cards, so you can play more of the rare and powerful cards. We then design the rare and powerful cards such that they can win the game by themselves, and we don't want you to get blown out because that might be a thing that is upsetting to newer players or to less experienced or capable players. So we're going to absolutely make sure that we put in different effects on them, like enter the battlefield effects, or just straight up ward and hexproof, or to a lesser extent haste, to make sure you get those immediate values. And so the one thing that could make all of this even and somewhat equitable is if removal could keep track with all of it. But can removal keep track of all of this? Actually, no. We're going to go ahead and look over here. We're going to sort by, instead of rarity, we're going to sort by name. Once I can find the name. There we go. We're going to sort by name. The reason we're going to do that is going to show you a couple of examples, right? So what I would need you to know is when we get immediate value in the current rares and mythics of a game that is more and more populated by rares and mythics, that means that our answers must be more immediate. It is no longer acceptable for us to have 4-mana sorcery kill a creature. We don't need murder, we need Doomblade, right? We don't need pacifism, we need Path of Exile. And the reason we need these things is that if we don't get them, they might actually give the opponent those cards, those rares, those mythics, those limited bombs, might give such an overwhelming amount of success and capability to our opponents that the removal of that one creature just doesn't fucking matter. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more examples here. We sorted by alphabet. So I want you to know, again, you're finding things like Overlords that generate effects immediately, Kaito, who is just plain out hexproof. We have Worms that just destroy things. We have Altanak Thrice Called, who is an uncommon 9/9 for 7 mana with trample, and he gives you a card whenever he's targeted. And you can actually just filter if you make the mistake of having too many Altanaks, don't worry. We also give you ability to drop him out so that you can get some other effect, all in the name of making sure you don't feel bad. So what removal do we have for these ridiculously powerful cards? Well, let's look at our first candidate. Came Back Wrong. Again, this is not just this set. This is more this set plus all of the other aspects of this set. So let's see if we can't find... Why is it not searching properly? Oh, come on, you. Doodly-doo. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Come Back Wrong. So Come Back Wrong is 2 and a black for a sorcery that destroys a creature. If a creature is put into a graveyard this way, return it to the battlefield under your control, sacrifice at the beginning of your next end step. This, I will note to you, is a rare. This is a rare, and all it does is at sorcery speed destroy 1 creature. As I've mentioned, there's going to be, first off, there's a ton more threats that are being generated, and there's this removal being at rare is actually not sufficiently common or uncommon enough for you to keep pace with all of those rares. And all it does, it says, hey, we're gonna, because killing the creature isn't good enough, we're gonna give you their creature so you can have their insane haste, enter the battlefield, leave the battlefield effects as well, right? At a rare. You know what I would rather have than this? Murder. Just 3 mana, instantly get rid of a problem. But you're going to see a lot of that, actually. So let's go ahead and take another look. We're going to look at Split Up. 1 white sorcery, destroy all tapped or destroy all untapped creatures. Now, with the power level of these kinds of rares, especially the mythics, you would think that actually this would be good, but it's not, because it turns out actually when you're making other creatures, when you have multiple large dudes to swing, maybe at the lowest level it's possible for someone to swing and then you block out nicely and then you get a split up and you just completely wreck them. But I'll note again that this is a rare. I'll also note that circumstance becomes less and less likely the more skilled, the more powerful, the more experienced the players you're playing against are. And this at sorcery speed is also just frankly too slow. Let's take a look at, one of the cards that actually has a bit of hype to it, right? That people really think is good, like, oh, it's going to prove me wrong on this. Here we go, Unidentified Hovership. It's a 1 white 2/2 vehicle that exiles up to 1 target creature with toughness 5 or less. Are most of the overlords over 5 toughness? Yes. Is Altanak the 9/9 with trample over that? Yes. Are most of the green stompies over that? Yes. Okay, so, but don't worry, if this ever leaves the battlefield, they get their creature back. As opposed to Journey to Nowhere. right? Or something like this. Here are some notable exceptions, right? Well, let's just show a couple of examples here. So here's a good one, right? Here's one that's actually good, and this is kind of why I don't know how to say it other than this indicates how far gone things are in limited design. For that, Duskmourn has this card, and I think that even at uncommon, this does not do enough to solve those large problems. So let's look at Exorcise. 1 in a white sorcery, exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. This seems like it's a great bomb answer, except it's not. The bombs are actually generating so much value that the removal of the bomb just means you get to keep playing the game. It's not actually a punishing thing that swings the game back in your state. And so Exercise, as good as it is, still has to be instant speed, right? It still has to exile a target tapped creature. Fortunately, there is a card that does that. I mean, look at, here's a great example of how all of the removal has actually been sapped of its power and of its agency, and is left to make sure that people feel strong and smart because they play a big mythic, right? 1 second. Sporogenic Infection, right next to it. When Sporogenic Infection enters, target player sacrifices a creature other than the enchanted creature. When enchanted creature is dealt damage, destroy it. Okay, so this is like Farika's Libation with, if this thing is ever dealt damage, it also dies. You'll notice that this is one of the ways they've tried to rebalance the color pie, is to take the more unconditional removal and phase it more towards black, but they haven't changed the impact on card design for limited to orient around the reality of that happening. So for instance, we have, again, last few examples, and then we'll bugger off to my next point. But here's a good example. Like, oh wait, but like Drag to the Roots is pretty good. Yeah, Bad Putrefy is pretty good. But okay, it is instant speed, and that's not an unreasonable mana cost. It could even be reduced to just black-green, just Golgari. And, you know, okay, that's fine, but that's a black card. Let's take a look at Withering Torment. Oh, just destroy target creature and enchantment at instant speed, 3 mana. Oh, but it's only in black, actually. Not splashable black, but it's only in black. The only white card in here that does something like this says destroy target tapped creature or exiles target tapped creature, but you can pay 5 mana to affect some untapped creature. I think it's the other way around. I think it's 5 mana and then it's -3 if the creature is tapped. Right? Let me see if I can't find that really quickly. Doodle-doo, doo-doo-doo. Doodle-doo. I mean, we already looked at Betrayer's Bargain and some other ones. You get the point, right? These are not sufficient to answer the question of what the hell do you do against all of this fucking insanely... There's not only more rares, as seen by the play boosters, but they have more impact, as covered by Patrick Sullivan, right, as prophesized by him. There's more rares, they have, and more mythics that have more immediate impact, that have fewer outplay potential, that has less of a feel bad associated with it, all in the name of what? Of what? Well, probably in name of the primary audience of Magic the Gathering. Now, if you thought I was going to be complaining about a format and I wasn't going to say anything about Commander, I fucking don't know what to tell you. We're going to go ahead and show that there is actually some relationship there between making sure cards don't feel bad, increasing the power level of cards offensively, and removing defensive tools or agency. Right? And in that way, this game has the same problem as a lot of fighting games, where in order to make things more exciting, they put in bars and extra super meters and full combos and extenders and things of this nature, because it's actually just not fun to the average layperson to see someone block all of their stuff and tell them to get wrecked. But it's super satisfying and skill expressive in Street Fighter 6 to punch someone up against a wall because they actually did the right thing and blocked your move, but actually that's the wrong thing to do because we want combos to happen in the game and we hate defensive moves and defensive counterplay. Games are better when defensive play is better, because that means that there are more means for blowouts to happen and more nuance and skill expression. And we have moved away from that. Now, you might think that's just me, like, moving on in time. I haven't quite, kept up with the game, etc. And I want to show you something that's a bit interesting. Again, I already mentioned that Trinket Mage said the same thing about Modern. It wouldn't be surprising that the ethos of affecting Modern, which, by the way, is coming for Pioneer. If you think that Pioneer Horizons isn't going to do the same thing, I've got nothing to tell you. Like, prepare for Arclight Phoenix to be like a tier 4 deck, as opposed to just playing constructed Pioneer. Oh, come on now. Pioneer Horizons. But here's a good example, right? So, but where does all this come from? Why does this all change? Well, again, I would suggest to you it comes from the desire for games to not feel bad for newer players, less experienced players, and to create it's this modern idea, and I mean very modern, not the format, but new idea that players shouldn't experience bad things. They shouldn't experience pain in any meaningful way, because that might make them not like the game. And it's more important that we have more people playing the game and liking the game than that we keep the game actually fun and maintaining its enjoyment. I made this post on Distraction Makers on a video of theirs. They responded to it and said basically they have their sympathies and they commiserate with me, which is that, limited Magic the Gathering used to be about giving you a lantern and a hatchet in the middle of the night on a new moon in front of a forest and telling you to figure out. Now it's a park rangers tour at 2 p.m. with a family alongside. And here's why. I'm going to show you. Ladies and gentlemen, Commanders printed per set, gathered by the glorious power of Python. Now, this is every set in Magic the Gathering's, well, not every, but a lot of the sets in Magic the Gathering's history, right? I mean, we can see over here, we've got Dominaria United, there's OTJ, this shows the age of this, there's Amonkhet, right? There's Theros. But I want you to note something. It has been explicitly said that sets in Magic have had their influence and their prerogatives changed by Commander since New Phyrexia. So I want you to look up NPH right here, unless you think that's Nephalia. I'm pretty sure that's New Phyrexia. I just want you to know what happens here from about, 2011, give or take. From 2011 until about 2018, right? And for lore reasons, I actually exclude Dominaria on this one, but like until about, M19, something like that, we've got a pretty regular rise. It's okay. The number of commanders hasn't gone crazy, but this is about when everyone realized that, especially Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast, you can put the donkey and pin the tail on the blame game wherever you want. But you can see an inarguable trend right here, about 2019, courtesy of World Events. You can see the popularity of Commander start to rise. You can see that the popularity of Magic as a casual format, as a casual game, has started to rise. This is kind of when that idea of, more broadly in culture and society, that idea of what are the nerds doing was more popular, right? You start seeing things like the proliferation of Marvel movies, like it's starting to eke out into the mainstream. You see other spaces like comic books get affected by this. You see anime also gets affected by this, but we're not here to do a whole sociological breakdown on why the reduction of geek and nerd spaces is actually deleterious both to the geeks and the nerds and has negative impacts and dilutes all the products that they like and kicks them out of the space that was their box in the first place. Just look at what happens from about 2019 onwards to 2024. This is the number of commanders, not legendaries. Not legendaries. It could be a legendary artifact, a legendary enchantment, it could be a vehicle. No, these are all commanders. All of them are legendary creatures. So you notice we're not talking about how in War of the Spark there were a million extra legendaries added because of planeswalkers. No, this would count Animato. It wouldn't count Narset, Parter, or Veils, right? To give you an idea. And you can see this actually if you've played Limited. You know in your heart that this is true. And the reason I can prove that you know in your heart this is true, if you have some familiarity with this topic, is I'm going to show you some cards right now, and and they're just from Duskmourn. I could obviously pick like OTJ and all of the tricolor commander friendly cards that exist there solely, wholly, and only for the purpose of making a commander that does that thing in one extra color than it used to. I could show you Hinata from Neon Dynasty, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and just show you that card has way too many extra colors. We could all like scrimp and save and like turn our brains inside out about why there had to be actually 3 separate versions of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings set, which conveniently all have different colors, right? Of the sacred fire or flame, and then of the gray and the white, all have different color combination. I'm sure that's a pure coincidence. Like, I could be definitely wrong. It definitely has nothing to do with the proliferation of Commander products. But if you think it's not impacting the actual design of Limited, let me show you something interesting. So we're just going to pick a couple of cards here. These are kind of the signpost cards that indicate the problem that I'm seeing. So let's go over here. We're going to go on back. We're going to look up the first one. Come here. We're going to look up. Oh. Come here, you. Marina Vendrell. Now, if you think there is a good reason, that the first primary focus of the set for Marina Vendrell was to figure out what character they were and then decide they were a 5-color commander afterwards, I really have got nothing for you. I can't help you. You probably can't be saved. You probably like the way current Limited plays because it allows you to not have to worry about your opponent having Spore Crawler and having a 3/2 for 3 mana that has a slightly bigger effect. You probably think that like Thrashing Brontodon is a card that makes you sleep from M20 for exactly the same reason. I'm just picking green cards to highlight the green disparity that I was talking about with cards like Avabruck. But if you think that the story and the lore is the reason Marina Vendrell is a 5, has all 5 colors, and locks or unlocks a door of target room you control as a sorcery, what's more likely? That this is a real card that they wanted to make, or that they wanted to make a room commander, and this is a room commander that lets you play all the colors of the rainbow you could ever desire? But maybe you're not convinced by that, so let's just take a look over here at Winter Misanthropic Guide. How many times in the last 5 years have you seen a 4-mana card that is a legendary creature and fucking sigh, it has 3 colors in it and only 1 regular mana pip? Because this is not actually Winter Misanthropic Guide, right? This is, and does it have word 2 for Limited? Does it have each player draws 2 cards and then a delirium effect for Limited? No. The reason it has 3 colors, it has this stat line, it has ward, and it says legendary, is because of the proliferation of Commander. And Commander players, by my own experience, having played in multiple FNMs, played with multiple people across different states, different stores, different countries even, by and large, outside of the CEDH community or adjacent high power community, Commander players don't want to be told that their toys can't exist. They actually hated when I brought to a recent store. I won an F&M with, of all things, here, let me see if I can find it. Basically, oh, sick. Let me review that, hide that. Basically, Commander players hate when you play something that says you don't get to have fun the way that you want irresponsibly. So if you play something that has a lot of removal, like I played a Glissa Sunslayer, who basically just played board police for a bunch of people who had unprotected combo pieces wandering around and just wanted to go ahead and dirtle all they wanted, right? Commander players don't like being told that they don't get to have nice things. They don't like getting told that they have to interact in some way. They want to benefit immediately, and that is why the number of Commander playable cards has grown in these sets, in these limited sets. And what that means for me, and the reason that I care about that, is I could just avoid Commander if I don't like Commander. But I can't avoid Commander's influence on limited. I can't avoid this number of unplayable dog shit rares who are clearly put in there so they can be attractive to the Commander player base or build around to the Commander player base. I don't like seeing that there's more and more power being shoved into these cards, and they have more and more excuses as to why they can't be removed, or it would be negative for them to be removed, or actually removing doesn't solve the problem. And it doesn't feel like I'm playing the game anymore. It doesn't feel like I'm making interesting decisions. It feels like I'm just kind of present with a bunch of cards that I can decide to put together in a combination that makes sense, and you can definitely practice that and train that and improve that, but it doesn't feel like I'm making interesting points. I'm not causing interesting points of variance. I'm just awash in a sea of power filters, of power scaling, of power creep. where a bunch of things just happen and they can't be rescinded or stopped because the cards aren't made to be rescinded or stopped. Look at the number of counterspells that have been in sets. Look at the number of requirements required of the player to generate value. So here's what I'm going to do is the last little bit. If you've stuck with me this long, I really appreciate it. We're going to show that this is not just like pure boomerdom, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to a set that I think, while not perfect, had a lot of cards that show that they would just be too weak and couldn't be used now in limited because they're not good enough. We're going to be going back to an example of cards in Scars of Mirrodin. That's right, Scars of Mirrodin, where you have stuff like Kemba, Ka Regent, where you have to put together this Rube Goldberg machine of things together in order for your rare to prove that it's a rare, to get value, to justify itself. And sometimes that went too far, but you know what it meant? It meant that the powers were squished. Right now, we have, I'll just very quickly do this. If we're on a 1-to-100 and we have commons at in the old days, commons were at 25. An uncommon might be at 45, but a rare might be at 60. Right? So actually the parity of uncommons to rares is pretty good there. And commons can shoot up, but actually they can trade somewhat more. A common that's rated as a 32 instead of a 25 is really good, even if it's worse than an uncommon because of the trade up and the slower pace of the game. Now in a game where there's so many bombs and so many print sets that generating that value one turn earlier is immediately infinitely better than just drawing the extra card. The sacred precept that exists in limited for literally decades. Yeah, it's a fucking mess. So we're going to take you all the way back in time, the Scars of Mirrodin, to show you what rares looked like pre-Commander, pre-play boosters, back when you actually had to synergize some of the things you have. And there's still powerful cards. You wouldn't want to run afoul of a Wormcoil engine, but we're going to show that there's not as many guardrails to stop the feel bad, to stop the getting blown out. So let's go ahead. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to zoom out a little bit so I can see this a little more easily. I'm filling. Cool. And we're going to go ahead. This is going to be the end of the topic, right? And this is going to be one of the sets that I thought did an excellent job of doing all of this. We're going to go ahead and show you Scars of Mirrodin. Oh boy. All right. Indomitable Archangel. It's a 4-mana. It's a mythic card. 4 mana, 4/4 flyer, and artifacts you control have Shroud as long as you have 3 or more artifacts. There's no self-protection in this. It doesn't say this creature has hexproof as long as you have 3 or more artifacts. It is just a 4 mana, 4/4 flyer. And it turns out that even without Metalcraft, it's really fucking good. I started this whole example by talking about Liege of the Tangle, how Liege of the Tangle has insane text, but you have to play it, it has to swing, it has to do damage, it has to live the next turn, and then you can actually swing and blow out. Yes, that is a clock, but it's a clock on an 8-mana card. Here's Platinum Empyrean. Holy shit, what a magic card. Your life total can't change. 8 mana, 8/8. No protection effects whatsoever. None. 0 protection effects. Right? Even the ones that are pretty strong over here, right? Let's look at Sword. I know, listen, people played during Callblade. They didn't like Callblade. The effect of this card on Limited, though, pretty reasonable. Not always an instant win, right? Because of the way that protection worked in this set with a bunch of other cards, and the way that there were cards specifically to destroy artifacts, specifically to stop equipment. Let's look at Sword of Body and Mind. Pretty fucking good card, right? We're talking about the highest rarity cards, and then as we go down, you'll see all of these things have something in common, don't they? They all have that there's an aspect of play to them. They all ask something of their user in a way that these mythics and rares I've shown you from even this most recent set just fucking don't. Sword of Body and Mind. 3 to play, 2 to equip. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from green and blue. What the fuck? Pretty good. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, so they actually have to deal combat damage. It gives protection, but it doesn't give trample. It doesn't give haste. The creature has to be able to attack. All right? Or you have to have set up that you want to put this on a flyer. right? Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, so you can't even like ping with a young pyromancer or something like that. It actually just has to fight. You put a 2/2 green wolf token into the battlefield, and that player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Do you know how many swings it takes of Sword of Body in Mind for the game to actually be over because of the mill effect? It actually takes 2 uncontested swings on the low end, but 3 on the reasonable end for that just to be the end of the game, right? And it costs 5 mana or 2 turns, and while the wolf is powerful, it's negligible compared to all the stuff we see from more recent sets, right? Holy shit, Wormcoil Engine! Whenever it... Okay, this actually breaks our rule, doesn't it? Because it does something whenever it dies. Yeah, it splits from a 6/6 Death Touch lifelink into a 3/3 Death Touch and a 3/3 lifelink. This is the closest to a more modern card that we see. Let's look at Contagion Engine. Like, let's pick something even cheaper, actually. We've got all these 6 and 7 mana cards. Let's look at Etched Champion. Etched Champion is a 3 mana 2/2 that anyone can play. Protection from all colors as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. You know what this card is without Metalcraft? Fucking ass. You know what this card is with Metalcraft? The most goated blocker and swinger ever, except actually this set has a lot of artifacts. Notice how all of these things are asking the player to do something, to make something happen. Even Hand of the Praetors, right? 4 mana, 3/2 Infect. Other creatures you control with Infect get 1/1. Not this creature, other creatures. You have to do something. You have to have a board state that doesn't just auto-generate itself. Whenever you cast a creature spell with Infect, target player gets a poison counter. Now, it's not asking a lot. It's just saying, if you're playing poison, maybe, and you're in the color black, which you should be, maybe you should be playing Hand of the Praetors. But here's what's interesting. It still asks something of a deck-building constraint. It asks something of the player who is trying to snipe these cards for themselves in a limited environment, right? Here's another example I mentioned already. Kemba, Ka Regent. It is a 3 mana 2/4, fucking bog standard, probably even a little worse because it's 1 white. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 2/2 white cat creature token in the battlefield for each equipment attached to Kemba, Ka Regent. So Kemba has to be in play, and then on the beginning of your upkeep, he has to have an equipment on him that you spent mana and probably a turn to put on, and your reward for doing that is that you make a 2/2. Not a 2/2 that then like gives +1/+1 to everything else. It's not a 2/2 flyer. It's not a 2/2 with haste. It just gives you a creature that has its self-summoning sickness after you jump through multiple hoops to go ahead and do this. Right? Even the strong ones like Mimic Vat still ask you to figure out what you want to put into play, right? Put a token into the battlefield. It's a copy of the exiled card. It gains haste and exile at the beginning of the next end step. That's a really good effect, but it requires that this be on the battlefield and that you exile a card, right? It requires that you play the Mimic Vat, combat interactions happen, something dies, and then you put it inside of the Mimic Vat, and then you spend the mana to go ahead and do that. And also, it doesn't return the creature itself. It exiles under the Mimic Vat, itself a very destructible thing. So look at how all of these cards, here's even a dumb one. Here's Precursor Golem. It's a 5 mana 3/3 that makes 2 3/3s on play. Isn't that violating our idea? Like that this thing can't just do something crazy? Well, actually, not so much. It's 5 mana, yes, for a 9/9 in power, but split across that many bodies, there's actually some counterplay and some interaction. This is a very strong card and the closest to one of the more modern sensibilities, but it still asks something of the player. It still asks them to do something, like Spike Shot Elder asks you to put an equipment on it or to buff it. Or Steel Hellkite, it has a very dominant effect to blow up things on the board, but asks that you've actually dealt damage with the 6 mana 5/5 flyer. It doesn't have haste to do that either, and you have to pay an amount of mana equal to whatever you wanted to destroy. So it's removal, it's repeatable, it's a threat, it's a bomb, but it's costly in some way, right? And this is all over. Like, look at this. Acid Web Spider. 3/5 with reach, pretty bad. You may destroy target equipment. It's may, you don't have to. It also demands that there be an equipment on the field for it to destroy. Green is also known for destroying artifacts and enchantments. It fits into the color pie. You can see how there's all these restrictions built in that ask something of the player. Ask that a board state be established. Ask that some cognizance of what this card can do for you and what it can't do for you be understood by the player. There has to be an equipment, or you have to clear the air, or you have to set this up in advance of combat, or you have to have equipments to put on your Kemba to actually get it to have its value. Even something as dumb as Bellowing Tangleworm. 5 mana, Intimidate, 4/4, other green creatures you control have Intimidate. Asks that you have other green creatures that have Intimidate. Asks that you have a good board position for Intimidate to exist. And the reason I'm so mad, basically, about all of this is that all of these things, all of the shifts that we've seen from Scars of Mirrodin through to Duskmourn, as predicted by Patrick Sullivan, as affected by the play boosters from 2024, as mirrored in the criticisms that the Trinket Mage had of the One Ring, all of these things speak to the reality that Limited is just not my format anymore. It's not for me. It's for people who want to jam a bunch of rares and mythics and just slam them on the table and kind of let it play for themselves. And as one of the articles that I showed you earlier said, isn't that a lot like just saying, I want to play Constructed?